Okay. Welcome to another. We're on. Yeah. Welcome to another episode of Reptile Fight Club. I'm Justin Julian, your host, and unfortunately, Rob couldn't be with us today, so I had to find these two scrubs off the street that kind of scab in for him, and so we're happy to have a couple of guys to fill in. It takes two to fill in for Rob. So.
Rob shoes.
Yeah, exactly. He's got big shoes to fill. But thanks for coming on, guys. We got Ron St. Pierre, a familiar voice on this podcast, and then we're adding Allen Repashy. So we had to bring in some big guns. So thanks for coming, guys.
The voice you never hear on podcast.
Buried down under a big ass rock for a long time.
Yeah,
I know.
It's I've been afraid to come out of the woodwork and have people realize that you and I have a history together, because it's kind of embarrassing.
Protecting the reputation.
It's like, man, if people know I've known Ron all these years, that's gonna just ruin my reputation.
I sold you your first frill dragons, man.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I have to say, Ron and I go way back, and I don't know
how far. Like, when did you guys meet or?
Find
out about each other.
An ad in Reptiles magazine in like the back section that he was advertising stuff in Florida, and that had to have been
92.
When was Andrew?
92.
92. So sometime around. I think I might have known or had made contact with him before that, and then there was
David Blair.
And then there was a large period of silence when Andrew came.
Yeah, there was that.
Knocked everything out.
Yeah. I have to say, I don't know where I'd be in this hobby without Ron, other than I'd be in a better place.
And I feel exactly the same.
Yeah, that's crazy. 92. A lot of listeners probably weren't even born then. So
it was a different. Everybody, back in the day, but whatever. It was fucking different. It was.
Yeah.
You wanted to find something. You had to find somebody. Mm-hmm. Not you couldn't just say, I want to find frill dragons. It's like, I need to find somebody that knows something about frill dragons and where to get them. But back then, when those frill dragons came in, that was kind of the first time in history that they had started coming in.
Okay, and these are Indonesian from Indonesia.
Yeah, they were Indo.
Yeah, these were mostly Indonesians. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you ran to the telegraph station and send
just about. Yeah, this was before
smoke signals.
This was in the day of classified ads and telephones that had cords on them and that was pre-email even, I think, wasn't it? That was
it was pre-email.
Yeah, because I don't know what was like the birth of the internet, kind of, where people actually had computers in their houses and stuff. It had to have been early around that time. I think it probably started. So.
Yeah, kind of later night or mid 90s. Yeah, at least that's when I got my first email. I think I remember.
I was a late adopter because I didn't believe that it would turn into anything.
You called that one.
Yeah, I called that one. Yeah. I can tell you that I wish it had never happened in so many ways, and especially when you're raising. I'm raising a kid. I've got. I became a first-time father at 50, and now I've got a daughter that's turning 12 next week or next month, and just seeing how much their lives are just glued around the technology and texting and emails and YouTube, and my daughter is limited to 1 hour a day of internet stuff, and to her I'm like the biggest Nazi on the planet. and she doesn't have a phone number yet. She has an iPhone that I control all the shit on, and she can text with other kids that have iPhones, but if she doesn't get to know anybody that has an Android, apparently, because without a phone number you can't text except an iMessage, I guess. So I don't know all of it, but she finds ways around it.
They always do, right?
But I can just set her phone up, so it's like you get 1 hour of internet access, a day.
I know she was messaging my daughter for a little while.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So
pretty cool.
You might want to talk about what was that, 2 years ago?
Was it? I think it was longer than that, wasn't it?
Could have been maybe 3.
Yeah, time goes by. I mean, whatever. And whoever knows when people listen to this. So it could be 20 years ago.
I've had a property down in Ocotillo, which is right in the heart of herping country down there, right off of S2 where everything happens. And I'm there for not just for that, but because it's a great off-roading spot.
Yeah.
And so we've had this property down there, and we started building on it. You should see it now. We've got. I've got a 3,000 foot shop.
Oh, nice.
And we have a 2,400 square foot house that is a barn dominium. We put up steel buildings.
Yeah.
And then one of them is my shop for my car stuff and everything. The other one is we're framing it out like a house inside. So
I remember you talking about maybe doing a herp Airbnb. That would be
that is the plan. And actually, I've been talking to Philippe, and I've kind of got another vision for doing a herp thing. I guess it would be Herpathon 3, I guess, because 2 never really happened. But we've been talking about kind of going back to basics and just doing a like Burning Man version of Herpathon and have everybody come down to our property and camp out. And I mean, I've got a shop that's big enough we could put 100 seats in it if we wanted to. But I mean, I'm over really caring how many people show up, but I'd love to have a couple of dozen people come down and we could do talks around a fire pit.
That'd be cool.
And then take a break and go herp and come back, because I mean, it's like we do it like in late April, early May, which is like the perfect time down there. The only, as you know, the only nemesis down there that time of year is the wind.
Oh yeah. we pitched a tent on Allen's property and about got blown to like anytime you see windmills nearby, it's probably not the best place to set up a tent.
Is that Santa Ana winds or that's its own thing out there?
It's seasonal. It's the spring. They get pretty strong winds down there.
Because of the canyons funnel it.
Yeah, it's we've got just directly like 3 or 4 miles to the west. We've got the backside of the mountains that separate the coast from the desert, and so the wind comes off the ocean, gets that, and the temperature changes and it drops and it just starts blowing across the desert, and we're kind of right in the trough where it comes down the mountain and hits the desert. So. A couple months out of the year, it can be. It's hit and miss too. You just never know. It can be perfect one day and then blowing 50, 60 miles an hour the next day.
Yeah. Well, that last time we came out there with Rob and who was Eric with us and a couple others, there was no wind. Like that night, the previous night or previous couple nights had rained and were pretty windy and stuff. And then that night was like still as could be. We saw nothing, like no reptile movement. So I think the winds are not a bad thing when you're looking for the reptile.
Yeah, if you're prepared for it. And my idea with this thing is like people can just rent RVs and come, and we've got I've got a big giant almost a football size area that I've put down road base, and you can kind of like circle the wagons, like all my friends that we off-road with come with their tow rigs, and we park in a big circle, and we get a good number of people down there. And we put up 3 sea containers down there since you've been down there, 3 40-foot high coupe containers in a horseshoe around the patio that was there. So it makes a really good windbreak as well.
Oh, so, nice. Yeah, perfect. Count me in. Yeah, I'd love to do that again. That Herpathon 1 was a good event.
Maybe we can get Ron out, but I don't know if he's ever flown again since that one drastic time in his life.
No, Heather's made me get on planes to go to Finland.
So I'm curious, like what were you up to at that time, Ron, when you met Allen? What was going on in your?
No, I mean, I was already.
He was a whore selling anoles for a living.
That's kind of true.
I mean, you were both established in the reptile world, right? At the
I mean,
ads. You got to be.
I was 92. I would have been 20
you had, other than this, like his main living back then was, I don't want to tell anybody secrets or anything, but he was catching anoles, like Cuban anoles.
Yep, supplying the trade.
And even the other more common anoles and catching caimans out of the canals and stuff like that.
Turtles and stuff that go from the crotch.
He was a resourceful guy. He was like, I'll do it. I'll climb a tree and wrestle an alligator if I don't have to go to school today.
That's absolutely true. I never did well taking. I've never really worked a job either. I'm just not cut out for that shit.
Yeah, no, that's you and me both. I found a way to
get paid doing where you want to go.
I started my first business when I was probably 13, taking care of fish tanks and doctors' offices and restaurants and stuff. And I went to college, got a 4-year business degree, and got out and sold office supplies for like 3 or 4 months because my parents told me I needed to get a real job. And and the whole time I was doing it, I was just planning, and I'm like, why did I sell my fucking fish tank business? I was making, like, this is 1985, and I was making like a couple of grand a month, just cruising around with a bucket and a siphon hose and working like 2 days a week, and then I get a degree and get out of college, and like, oh yeah, you could make $1,500 or $2,000 a month maybe if you get a 60 hour a week job. And I'm like,
I was already doing that. I was making better than that.
Backwards for 4 years. If I grown my business for another 4 years instead of going to school, where would I be?
But do you think the degree helped out at all in your business acumen?
That's the thing is you just don't know.
Yeah.
It's like college gave me, the biggest thing I got out of college was social skills, I guess, dealing with other people, because I was always kind of a loner. And so I went from being a loner beach rat to being in a college fraternity, and the politics of a group of people that was kind of, a fraternity is kind of like a juvenile version of a corporation, really. You've got officers and you've got drama, and you've got committee meetings, and you've got all this stuff, and those were actually like real life skills.
Working with different personalities.
I learned some of the key things I learned were statistics, which I took and used all throughout, like figuring out the math for breeding stuff. It's like these statistics and basic math and accounting. You can't get rich if you can't count your money.
Know how much to spend and how much to save.
But yeah, so it's like, well, did I get the confidence in school to go out and chase after my dream, or would I have chased it anyway if I didn't go to school? I don't know the answer to that.
It's an impossible answer.
All I know is that if I could do it again, I wouldn't do it any different, because everything I did made me the person I am today, and I'm perfectly happy with that. So here we are.
Okay, so you guys, you messaged Ron looking for frilled lizards in the 90s and became.
Yeah, actually, we had a mutual.
I didn't message him. I wrote him a letter.
I meant telegraph message.
I probably picked up a phone and called him.
Actually, David Blair, who used to be a cyclure breeder, I don't know if he still does stuff, but out in San Diego was a friend of mine.
Okay, he's not related to Rick Blair, is he? The Utah colubrid breeder.
I don't think so.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure Dave was, but he was down there in San Diego with this guy, and
maybe Ric Flair, the wrestler.
But at the time I was commercially kind of like Alan, I dropped out of school when I was 16, though. I didn't go to college or anything. I was making so much money catching anoles by then. I'm like, why the fuck am I doing this shit? So I just kind of started doing that, and it just kept, I guess from my upbringing, I grew up in inner city, and, I grew up in the hood, and I had lots of friends. It's kind of a hustle culture there. And so I was always kind of good at that. That was just part of the thing. So, I would just make contacts with other dealers, and I eventually were supplying all those invasive and old species to every major dealer in the U.S. And it was probably because there were about 4 or 5 guys that did it, but most of them were fucking drug addicts. Yeah. So I was, I don't even smoke cigarettes, so I was able to clean their clock because I would be out there every day.
They all sold at Knowles to buy drugs, and Ron sold at Knowles to buy more reptiles.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just a different drug. Yeah,
pretty much. Pretty much.
That's a worse addiction, but,
right?
At least you didn't get high in your own supply.
Dude, I had those guys at times. They would see me driving. They'd see me get out of the car and pulling an owl out of a tree, and they would fucking come running up to the car, fucking making threats. Yeah. This is my neighborhood. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. First of all, I live 3 houses over there, bitch. And
literally my neighborhood.
Oh yeah, it was Miami was fucking nuts back then. But by 92, I had been at it for 6 years, and I was just starting to I started breeding my first pythons in 88. It was Burmese, or 86.
Yeah, Burmese. I remember when I came to see when did I come out there?
I think it was 93.
You had blood pythons then.
Probably.
Yeah, no, you did. I remember that.
I had a lot of. I was doing a lot of snakes.
I wasn't a snake guy, and he was trying to show off his fancy. Not blood pythons.
Blood boas. That was the blood boas. Yeah, that was 92, 93. Yeah.
He was trying to show off his fancy boas, and I wasn't really.
You were biting, huh?
Giving him the response that he was hoping for, I think.
Yeah.
But by then I was doing a lot of cyclura, which is how I knew Dave Blair, because he was a cyclura guy, and I was doing a lot of boa constrictors and colubrids and stuff. And this guy wanted to get into frill dragons, and I had recently just talked to Dave Blair, and I'm like, dude, they're fucking importing frills now. It's amazing. I can't believe we can get it. Strictly's bringing them in, and Strictly's right down the street. It was literally 3 miles from my house. So I was there all the fucking time. And so basically what he contacted me, he wanted some, so I would go to Strictly. I picked him out the sexes that he wanted, I think, right? And I sent them to you.
Yeah. You, they were, for back then, they were adults. They were $1,000 or something back then.
Wow.
And they were fucking, excuse the French, but they were in bad shape. I'm sure out of what came in, Ron picked me out the best stuff he could, but they were still, they looked like they'd been sitting in metal tubs or some kind of cages for a long time. Yeah. I'm picturing some of these collectors, something that's hard to collect. They go out and they collect one, and then they go out and they get another one the next week. And after a month, they've got enough for a shipment, but the oldest ones have been sitting in that tub for a month. And they had all these hard cysts all over their legs and stuff, where they've been sitting on the bottom of a galvanized tub or whatever it was. I don't know, but they came in pretty rough shape, and thankfully, between Ron getting me some good ones and me building a rainforest in my garage to set them up, we ended up being the first person that bred them, as far as I know.
I still remember that Reptiles article that came out.
Oh yeah, gosh, that was one of the very first Reptiles magazines, I think.
Yeah. That one stuck with me. Yeah,
that was when this guy. That was when, for me, until that point, Reptiles was I had my screen printing business, and I was already doing pretty good with my business. And Reptiles was just a curious distraction and something fun, because I'd always had stuff, but it always just had, local stuff that I could catch. Or, I had some exotics. I had Jackson's chameleons when I was 13 that basically lived outdoors in our yard and so in La Jolla, and they did just great outside on neglect and stuff. But the first animals I ever bought were cyclura, and then the frill dragons, and so I set up this elaborate walk-in cage that was it was the whole front half of my 2-car garage, and I had 2 big sliding glass doors that I used for the cage front. So it was the size of 2 6-foot sliding glass doors next to each other, and it was 8 feet tall and only 4 feet deep, I think. And I've planted it out and put in a misting system and planted it really, densely with live plants and big branches, and literally had a loop tape of tropical jungle music playing, the whole thing. Because to me, it was like, I want to build a rainforest in my garage.
Yeah.
And then these things bred for me, and they started cranking. And I remember I called Ron up and I told him, the first time I had eggs, and he was like, he didn't believe me, I think. And because I think the first eggs I got were from a gravid female that came in. Is that right, Ron?
Yeah. I mean, I had got some at either around the same time or shortly after you got them. It took me I threw mine outside in a big outdoor cage, and I was in Miami, but once they did settle in, I think I was about 8 or 10 months after your initial ones, but I wasn't sure that we would ever be able to get those to breed initially because we knew nothing about them.
Yeah.
And then you were getting eggs like within months of getting them. And I was like, oh, well, that's like super fucking positive, because that means that if they adjusted this quickly, then they're relatively, there's something that can be produced, and it's not going to be one of these like, fucking slogs where you try to figure out exactly
those weird tree dragon, voids and stuff that are just super cryptic and don't like to bask and stuff like that. These were basically just, bearded dragons that needed more space and more elevation, in a lot of ways. But they were different in a lot of ways too. I mean, absolutely. But a pagona is a pagona is a pagona.
I mean, we breed those today, and we've got 2 huge walk-in enclosures that have them, and they're 8 feet tall, and they spend most of their time all the way at the top on the giant branches, but they're cool as fuck. When you put them in an enclosure like that, then you can really enjoy them, because they do a lot of shit. And I have them right outside the back porch, so where the monitors used to be, and now when people come over and they sit on the porch, it's like mostly banana pectinata, and then the end one has the frills, and everybody focuses on the frills because the frills are doing all kinds of stuff.
It's pretty cool when you've got them in an area where you can walk around, and that was like the neatest thing when I first saw one in the field in Australia. It's like if they see you and you walk around a tree, they'll just scoot around the back and just perfectly time it. And then if you got to trick them, and then they come around a little far and they see you, then they go back, but they'll just go around and around the trunk of the tree. And then if you get them behind the tree, you can literally walk straight up to the tree and just reach around
and grab them.
You
demonstrated that in Iron Range, like when we got up there.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's right. Yeah,
that was cool.
Yeah. But you better get it right though, because if you get them around the waist, and you're gonna hurting for certain. Yeah.
They have those almost like fangs.
That's right. You went up that tree like
it was not the most effective way of grabbing one. Yeah, trying to climb the tree after it.
In your high tech climbing flip flops.
Yeah. I did redeem myself on a trip with my kids in 2016. My daughter Kate spotted one up in the top of a tree. This one had branches at least that I could hold on to, so I didn't have to climb a trunk, for 20 feet. But I actually got that one and brought it down for him, so that was good. But yeah, nothing like coming down in defeat, sliding down the trunk of a tree in your flip flops. So, were you able to sell them for more than the imports were costing? I mean, is that one of those board projects?
The imports, it was like a lot of stuff. It comes in and it's super expensive, and then they sucker in all the people to pay the big bucks, and then nobody buys them again, and then they come in so they came in for $1,000, and I bought them, and then and then nobody else was as stupid as me, and then they came in the next time and they were like $250.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're like, oh damn it! But then I'm looking at like 60 or 70 eggs in my incubator. Going, well, I can still make this work.
Yeah.
Right. And that was kind of the first time I looked at reptiles ever as like maybe this could be a business. Was because of the frill dragons because. I ended up getting about $1,000 a piece for the babies that first year, and I sold, I sold probably 50 babies or so, and that was just like, holy shit, I can scale this up maybe, and
he did.
And I did.
When I flew out there, he flew me out there like a year later. This fucker had a whole wall of baby frill dragons, like giant cages, glass enclosures full of them. I was like, oh my God.
That was down at my factory, right?
That was at the factory. Yep.
Yeah.
That was impressive.
At the screen printing factory?
Yes.
Yeah. I took
like these rooms full of reptiles.
Took over like some old offices and divided each office into like 2 cages, basically.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And had 8. So I had 8 cages that were, 6 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet, and had the small groups in each cage. And I also had a couple of cages. I don't know if when you were there, Ron, if it was all frill dragons, but I also did some.
No, you had Ackies and Tristis and Glowerdi and
some green tree monitors in those cages at the big ones at some point. But so you saw the Ackies and all that.
Oh
stuff.
yeah, by then you were buying shit from Frank and.
Yeah.
Pete.
Yeah,
you had all this stuff, and it was impressive. He fucking noob, and within a year, he's got everything I ever wanted all in one. I was like, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, and it all came from reptile money. Like I made my initial, stretch buying those frill dragons, and then everything. I just said, okay, well, I'm just gonna, keep a separate set of books and take the money I make from reptiles and put it back into reptiles. And within a couple of years, I had a lot of stuff. And the little monitors became pretty quickly more of a focus than the frill dragons, just from a space perspective. I said, well, I can do so much more with monitors in this space than these frill dragons. And I didn't feel like the frill dragons deserved to be downsized.
Yeah.
With their, certain things like a bearded dragon. Yeah. You can have arguments for a 2 foot by 6 foot cage for a pair or a trio of dragons. But when you see how the frill dragons, interact and stuff, you realize that you're doing a pretty big disservice to them to try to scale them down from anything other than a walk-in style room. So
I remember the first time I saw frilled dragons in the flesh was at the Berlin Zoo, and they had like this huge, walk-in enclosure and a couple 3 or 4 tree trunks and branches and stuff, and they had like 20 of them in there, and I seriously just sat and watched them for probably a good hour. They just run and climb and then one would get freaked out and run away. And it was so like entertaining to watch, but I couldn't imagine them being in much smaller than that. You wouldn't see those behaviors and that it just wouldn't be as cool, Did you, I imagine like when, you talked about setting them up kind of like a rainforest, when you saw them in the wild, did you, did that change anything or did that?
Well, in the wild, like you've seen, I think the ones that you and I saw were in Queensland, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then when you go see them in Kakadu, they're in a completely, well, not completely different, but much more lush area. But I did realize that, hey, that's more of an open woodland than a rainforest. You're not going to find them, where you find the chondros in Iron Range or anything like that. At least, I don't know. Have you ever seen or heard of frills?
No, it's always been in the woodland type.
Yeah, it's more of the open woodland type stuff. Mm-hmm. But still super high humidity and kind of
like seasonal rain. Like, did that factor in? Or?
Yeah, so that was everyone that herps. Like, if you are really into something, you need to go see where they live, because you can't just go on the internet and look at the weather and the humidity and say, oh, this is what it's like there. But yeah, you can not learn more than you can learn in one day going in situ and seeing where the stuff lives. Because I realized it's like, hey, and I went to Australia a couple different times of the year. I went when it was wet and when it was dry. I went when it was summer versus winter, and I realized that it's all about the food, the availability. To me, it came down to it's about the availability of their food supply, which is insects. And the availability of insects is directly related to not necessarily temperature, not
the rainy season,
not the day, not the length of the day. It's about the rain. If there's water, there's insects. If it's dry, they all go in the ground, and the lizards have to go dormant when it's 100 degrees out if there's no food around. Mm-hmm. So the activity of the reptiles is directly related to their food supply. And if the food supply goes away, they estivate, they do what they can to conserve until the food comes back again. Mm-hmm. And so in Australia, that's the wet and the dry, and it doesn't, and you're in an equatorial area where we don't have, like, in California here, we go from 8 hours a day and 14 hours of dark to the other way around. And I don't know what it is up there, but it's kind of all the same.
It's pretty much 12 and 12. Like it gets light at 5 a.m. and dark at 5 p.m.
And the temperature in Australia in those areas doesn't change a lot. The thing that changes is the wet and the dry. And when it's dry, everything just nothing happens. And then as soon as the water comes and the rains come, everything comes out and just flourishes.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's something I've always understood really well, because commercially collecting all these species in Florida, because we are a wet, dry season state. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the dry season, you can go outside and there's no fucking bugs. They don't bother you. There's nothing around, no mosquitoes, no horseflies, nothing. You don't find it, but you also don't find many lizards either.
Yeah.
But man, when the rains come and the bugs are out, then all the anoles are out, all the geckos are out, all that shit. Mm-hmm. So that kind of, I think, has been one of the things that has allowed me, because I put in a large amount of importance on the rain. And that's why we have built-in rain systems now that come massive above, 10 foot in the air sprinkler systems that go over various sections of the property so I can simulate rain if I need to, if we go through like a drought.
Yeah, and that's a lot of not to interrupt you, Rob, but a lot of tropical places, you have you have the afternoon monsoon, or a lot of places it mostly only rains at night.
Yeah,
and so these animals have to be, if they're in areas where there's not standing water, they've got to be out at night when it rains so they can hydrate. And
well, they also take advantage of dew cycles. So when it's dry, you generally still get dew cycles, and they do come out. Diurnal lizards come out at night, 2-3 a.m. and drink water off leaves. I've seen that myself. So yeah, that's.
Would you say, Ron, you do that yourself?
Yes, all the time.
Drinking the water off the leaves.
Actually, while we're doing this, it's fucking pouring out there right now. We're in a serious rainy season right now, like really bad. But
yeah, we were just down there in South Florida. My parents did a cruise, and so Heidi and I went a couple days early and went herping in the Everglades a couple times, and there were bugs everywhere, but we also saw a lot of good snakes and lizards and crocs and all sorts of stuff. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yep. I used to make all my money about 6 months out of the year and then have to live off of what I made for 6 months. So it was kind of like being a commercial fisherman, but instead of pulling up tunas, I was pulling Cuban anoles out of trees for 4 months, 5 months, and stocking up the money to be able to live the rest of the year.
And supplementing that with hand picking stuff at Strictly, and I mean, for me, like, we've talked about, and we'll probably talk about here tonight or today, whatever it is, about the differences between being a herper out here and being a herper back there and stuff, and I lost my train of thought.
I know Louis Porras got scared out of Florida or took off out of Florida and came to Utah.
Right?
Yeah. So I got to know him when I was.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely totally different vibe out there. But,
yes.
but out here, I know where I was going. We didn't really we had LA Reptile, but they were mostly just importing bread and butter stuff. You know, all of the exotic stuff came in through Florida, and so if you wanted the connections on getting the good stuff, you had to have somebody down in Florida. Because no offense to some of the people that had some of those places back then, but if I just called up out of the blue and said, "Oh, I see you've got, whatever such and such a lizard on your list. Can I get 10 of them?" And they're not gonna go in there and pick out the 10 nicest ones. They're gonna pick out the ones that they want to get out of their place before they're dead. So having a guy like Ron, and there weren't a lot of guys like Ron that had enough. That's a fine line working between making me happy and making the seller happy. Because if you're Strictly or whoever, and you got a guy that's coming in and all he does is handpick the cherry stuff and all your other stuff doesn't get sold, they're going to be like, "Hey man, you're just picking all our good shit and we can't sell the rest of it." So he's got to appease them and make it better for them. I don't know, give them more money or give them a reason. Like Ron brought them other stuff they wanted. So that was like, here's a bag of green and olds, now let me cherry pick out of this bin. And so, having him with the relationship he had with those importers, because of the business he was in, allowed him to be really good at what he did. And there weren't a lot of people like Ron that could have carte blanche and go in and just pick out the good stuff for people. And if you didn't have someone like that, it was a challenge. It was a challenge.
Yeah.
That was the wild, wild west, and there were no rules. There was no PETA. There was no nothing. And I mean, you the first time I went to Florida and went and saw some of the stuff, I was just like, man, yeah, it was a wake up call for sure. Ron's laughing.
He was like a kid. He goes, "This place is so fucking gangster, man. They're all they're like mobsters and shit." And yeah, I mean, but that was normal to me. And when he flew me out to his place, I was like, "Oh my God, this is how like middle class people live. It's all like fucking nice." And there wasn't garbage. There were no hookers on the road. There was no gangbangers in front of the 7-Eleven. It was like so fucking weird. And I was like, man, maybe I ought to think about getting my daughter, who was just like 2 at the time. I was like, maybe I should start really considering getting the fuck out of this place.
Yeah, I could hardly keep a straight face when I went and the first time I went out to see Ron, because I didn't realize what I was getting into. And I mean, he didn't live just in like, South Florida. I mean, he lived in the hood. I mean, it was an experience. I'd never been to, as a California beach kid, I'd never been to I'd been up to LA and, Watts and stuff like that and around some of the gangster stuff there. But, that's like, you go in and you look around and you get out as quick as possible. But to go like, spend time with someone that lives there and live in and stay in it, it's like, wow, this is sketchy. Like, you wake up because there's gunshots and stuff. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like that.
I saw a guy get murdered. I personally was shot at 3 times before I was 18 years old.
People shooting each other over fucking Cuban and Knowles. I mean,
now Ron, is
neighborhood, right? I mean, that's getting jacked for a bag of a Knowles. I mean,
yeah.
Ron, did you kind of build some like street cred there? Like people didn't mess with you, or did you always kind of have to watch your back?
If you live there, that you don't really get fucked with. All the times that I did have issues, this was before I was 18. But there was a period of time between when I was 16 to 18 that I may have been playing in a world I shouldn't have been playing in. And I brought a lot of shit on myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were in and out of prison so much then too.
Fuck you. But I did get arrested 2 weeks after I turned 18 for trying to steal a Trans Am, and that ended my career at that. I got lucky. The arresting cop took me to jail, uncuffed me like halfway there and put me in the front seat, and we just talked. He's like, "Yeah, man, you can't do this shit." And then 6 months later, I had my trial, and he came to my trial, and he spoke on my behalf and asked them to give me. So that really, up until that point, I hated cops. I had a specific word that I used specifically for cops, and it was, and that totally changed my perception of everything. And so when I walked out of that courtroom that day, I was like, "Fuck this! I'm never doing this shit again." Yeah. And then I went home. I severed all ties with the people that I was hanging out with. And that's really probably one of the most, other than Hurricane Andrew, that was probably the biggest pivotal moment for me as far as taking the reptile thing seriously. I was like, okay, now I cannot fuck around. No more car stealing. No more bullshit.
No more prostitution.
No more prostitution. So I realized I really have to get serious and make this fucking reptile thing work. And plus, by then, my wife at the time was pregnant with my daughter, and there was all these things that were at play right around that time. So, I have regrets on some of the things that I was involved in and that I did up until that point, but I learned a lot from all that. And I've used that, plus growing up. I mean, like he said, I lived in a really bad place. My house was 675 square feet, and it sat right on the side of I-95, which is a huge major thoroughfare, a freeway that runs up the East Coast. And so it was crazy. Like, it was a crazy place to live. I had to have my windows had grates screwed into them to keep people out from being broken into. And so God forbid if there was ever a fire, we would have all died in that house.
No air conditioning. I remember it was like 98 degrees and I was sleeping on a couch, and there was a fan that sounded like a turbo helicopter blowing on my face. And I was like, man.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got to
thankfully those days are long over, but the reptile business allowed me to dig out.
I went home and had a greater appreciation for what he'd accomplished. And I kind of was like, man, I gotta, cause I felt like I had certain skills and stuff that I could help him with. I'm like, man, I need to help him, like, getting himself in a better position and situation and stuff. And so, we kind of became pretty good friends, and we would talk. He'd teach me about reptile stuff, and I'd teach him a little bit about business and strategies and ideas, and how to look past what's for breakfast tomorrow, and try to figure out what's in what's down the road, and how to make lists and take what looks like a giant goal and break it down into steps that are that you can accomplish each one. And if you can get, say, this is a huge goal to do this. And if you look at it as one big jump, you can't do it. But if you break it down and say, these are the things I need to do to get to here, all I got to do is whittle away at them one at a time, and I'll get there. And sometimes people just, need to not have the skills to do it, but have the skills to understand the process.
Well, and I think, that's kind of one of the big things that I can see, you guys are pioneers, in the industry, and have done, a lot of things and brought a lot of things out and started a lot of new projects. So I thought, who better to talk about, kind of the pros and cons of starting a new project, or starting something that really has legs and can do well. And hopefully people listening can I'm sure they'll get, a ton of good information out of that. So I thought maybe that could be the topic for discussion today. And we'll get you guys. So we'll go ahead and flip a coin, see who.
Are we on any kind of a schedule? I don't know how long do your things?
I need to be out of here in about an hour and 10 minutes. So that's about the only limiting factor. But, usually our show goes about an hour.
We better hurry then.
We got both of it. All right. So we'll flip a coin, see who gets to kind of take maybe more of the con side or the hurdles or things to be aware of. And then the other one, kind of the pros and what kind of things to shoot for. If that sounds good. Okay.
Do it.
Who wants to call it? Who's feeling
love for beauty?
Ladies first.
Fuck you. All right, heads.
Heads. It is heads. You are the winner. So, what aspect or what side do you want to kind of?
I'll take the cons right now.
Okay, sounds good.
He was always a good con man. So
there you go.
All right, and then as the winner of the coin flip, you want to start us out, or do you want to let Alan go first?
No, we'll let Dickhead here go first.
I'm not sure exactly how this format works.
So just kind of bring up some pros or of starting a new project, kind of.
All right. Well, I think the most important thing you can do is I guess it depends on. You've got to decide when you start a project what your outcome desire is, whether it's for personal satisfaction or whether or not it's for commercial viability. Yeah. And then the ultimate is, of course, to be able to do both within the same project. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of people I see, ball pythons and leopard geckos, even crested geckos, which I'm, guilty for. But people oftentimes just look at it purely as the animals are just a way to the way to the means, I guess, mm-hmm. and you just breeding them because they're going to make you money, and you're not really into the animals. They're just an investment and something that you're going to take care of, and to me that's not the way to start a project, I guess.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like that's very successful. I've seen a few of those kind of businesses where they just pumped a lot of money into projects and bought up a bunch of different animals or morphs or whatever, and they're like used car salesmen. They didn't know much, or they partnered with a reptile person and put up all this money and just never really seemed to pan out. You didn't see those guys going very far. You almost have to have that passion for reptiles to make it work out.
Yeah, so I guess how do I make that into a positive thing? I say,
no, I mean, I think that's the idea is keep that in mind. That's what's important is to make sure you have that passion for it.
Yes. Have the passion.
I imagine though that, once you start or once you're successful, the longer you have a project, it kind of becomes old hat and maybe you're not as excited as you were at the first. I mean, is that a thing?
Yeah. Well, it's that's another thing. It's okay, why am I losing interest in this project? Is it because these animals aren't rewarding for me anymore, or because they're worth less and I can find something else that's worth more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, do you have examples of those kind of projects in your past where you've just kind of found the time to move on?
I mean, crested geckos are kind of they're the ultimate success and failure story in my life.
I'm going to grab a coffee. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Keep talking.
Yeah. I started out with the crested geckos just purely out of passion. Didn't know if they didn't even think about them being, having high fecundity and turning into, what they have become. Mm-hmm. I just thought they were the coolest gecko I'd ever seen. And I wanted the challenges of reproducing them and stuff. And then, they turned out to be fairly easy to breed and super polymorphic. So we had all these different traits that were coming out, and I got super excited about them, and wanted to share them with everybody. And my goal when I started was to just because there was so few of them were brought in originally.
Yeah.
But my biggest goal was to enjoy them and establish them enough in captivity so that they wouldn't be lost and that everyone else could enjoy them too. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, I realized just how productive they were and how easy it would be for me to scale up and produce them on a large scale at any price. I mean, the first ones were $5,000 a pair in 1995. Yep. And then I was selling the first babies I produced. I was selling for about that much. And then it took probably 4 or 5 years for them to get down to around a couple $100 a piece. And I still was enjoying them. And then I met, a long story, but there's a whole nother tangent here with my relationship with Bob and Sandflower, and Bob and I becoming partners and bringing bearded dragons and white tree frogs to the market. So then I was exposed to this commercial part of the business. Yeah. While the crested geckos I always had thought of as my own personal side project. Mm-hmm. And then we were doing so well with, Bob invented the bearded dragon. I mean, for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess you could also say I invented the crested gecko kind of under the same pretense. But and then Bob really invented White's tree frogs as well. But what Bob did was he was focused on a smaller scale of selling direct to retail. And then I came into the picture as one of Bob's friends. And then I had a friend, a guy named Todd Gwynn, that was a buyer of reptiles at Petco. Mm-hmm. This was when Petco had 200 or 300 stores. They were just a starting up, growing company. And we were like good friends. We herped together and stuff. And I didn't really talk too much about what he was doing at Petco, but he was always complaining about, not being able to get good sources for animals and having to sell imported stuff and having lots of losses in the stores and stuff. And so I started prying a little bit, and because I was, I owned a screen printing manufacturing business at the time, and I was 30 years old and I had 30 employees, and I was printing 10,000 shirts a day for the action sportswear industry. So I knew scalability and numbers and how to do things. And so he's like, I wish we could, get captive bred sources of this stuff. And I'm like, well, how much do you pay for, a tree frog? And he's like, $7.50. And how many can you sell in a week and in your stores? If you've got, let's say it was 250 stores. And he's like, we could sell probably at least 10 a week in each store. And I start doing the math, and I'm like, shit.
Frogs, yeah.
he's like, we're getting ready to buy out this other chain right now, and our goal is to have 500 stores by the end of next year. And I'm just going ching, and so that kind of spawned this whole other tangent with Bob and I on taking the infrastructure that Bob had built to be a good retail breeder and scale it up on a commercial scale. And so we were doing that and became quite successple with the whites and the bearded dragons, and we're doing everything that we promised Petco that we would do. Wow. And so while that was happening, I was developing this crested gecko thing on the side. And then, of course, there finally came a time where I'm like, damn, these things have the potential to end up in Petco, and so I started focusing a little bit more on holding back females and building a colony. And I said, okay, I've got to have at least 1,000 breeder females in order to even turn the switch on with Petco. And they made commitments to me to take them and put them in the stores and stuff. And then as soon as that happened, I mean, it literally went, I think by the year 2000, probably, I was producing 1,000 crested geckos a month or something. And then all the passion just disappeared, right? It became like, for a long time, I tried to get excited and look at every baby and stuff. And then it got to the point of just like, I felt like I was going to a chicken farm every day, and there was just nothing. There was just nothing to drive me left, and I looked, and I'm like, man, look at this monster that I've created. I mean, it's great that that I had made a gamble on crescent geckos going this far and becoming what they did, but at the same time, I just destroyed my love for all of the reptiles at a certain point. I just got my mind just blocked out because I was just created a monster that I didn't really like being a part of anymore. And it took me a long time. And then while that was all going on, Bob and I split up Sandfire. I ended up with the geckos and left him with the frogs and the dragons. So then in the middle of what I just told you about, the geckos went from being part of Sandfire to being my only income. Mm-hmm. And I was not, it wasn't fun anymore. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I started getting excited about was actually the nutritional side of things. And that started all the way back in Sandfire too, about trying to find ways to fix nutritional problems on scaling up and producing stuff on large scales. So whether it was raising the tadpoles, feeding the crested geckos, dusting the bearded dragons, those are basically my three main projects. And so when Sandfire split, I took the geckos and I took the food line, which at that time I had licensed to T-Rex, and T-Rex was selling Repashy Superfoods as like a sub-brand of T-Rex. Mm-hmm. So there I was with 10,000 Rhacodactylus between about 5,000 or 6,000 females, so 6,000 or 7,000 crested geckos, couple of thousand gargoyle geckos, 600 or 700 Leitianus, 500 Chihuahua. I mean, it was a massive deal. And I started focusing on the nutrition side of it, and got to a point where I was like, man, I sell a crested gecko, I make $20, but every crested gecko I sell, they buy a $10 jar of food every 3 months. And so I started shifting my mindset towards growing the food business and the supplement business, and finding a way out of the breeding business. When my biggest concern at that point was, because I was supplying Petco and PetSmart back then. My biggest concern was, like, I could, in a couple of phone calls, split my collection up and just send it out to a whole bunch of people. But then Petco and PetSmart would be left holding the bag, and they wouldn't have anybody that could supply them what they needed. So I ended up calling Petco and saying, hey, this is kind of the direction I'm going. And, you have other people that supply you other stuff. And I think that the best thing here would be for us to find someone that wants to take over my colony intact, so that they can just take all my stuff, all my animals, all my knowledge, and help them get going. And then you can get your supply from them, and it'll be seamless. Mm-hmm. And the day after I did that, I got a call from Bill Brandt, who was the gourmet rodent, and he was providing all the bearded dragons and colubrids to Petco and at the time. And so, anyway, long story short, Bill and I worked out a deal, and I sold him all of my my whole crested gecko colony and my whole auriculatus colony, and then I dispersed the Leitianus and Chihuahua and Saracenorum. And am I missing anything? No, I don't think so. Trichorhynchus. I only had a few Trichorhynchus, so that wasn't. I just gave that stuff to Bob, to Philippe. and I gave Philippe the cream of the crop on the lychees and the churros and stuff as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the downside of even when something starts out as a passion for you.
Yeah.
If you sometimes it instead of you driving the business drives you.
Yeah. That sounds an awful lot like a con. So let's go over to Ron.
Well, yeah, the fucker took both sides already. So
it tends to go that way.
I don't know how to play this game.
No, it's all good.
It's like if there was this little gremlin on my shoulder in my brain, and I looked at it and I looked in the mirror, I'd fucking see Ron's face. That's exactly who it would be.
Yeah, the funny thing about that is everything he said is the same shit that I have always struggled with, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do this, again, it's finding something that makes you want to get up in the morning and do it, but also being able to pay your fucking bills and eat and not, all that. So that's a hard combination. There are really not a lot, and God knows by now, over 200 species on some commercial level, trust me, the vast majority of the shit does not tick both of those boxes. Mm-hmm. It either ticks one or the other, but it's probably less than 50 species that tick both. And honestly, I'm probably being very generous with that. It's probably less than 25.
Yeah. Bearded dragons came along in mid-80s.
Yeah.
Crested geckos came along in the late 90s. At least when I look at the reptile world, sorry to all you snake people, but I'm blind to snakes. Okay. But in the lizard world, nothing has come since the crested gecko to rival it yet. And so
we might change that with blue tongue.
We've been now 30 years without something that has made the impact that crested geckos have made. Before we've had leopard geckos, bearded dragons, crested geckos, and
obviously ball pythons have kind of
yeah. So that's why I said I'm blind. I'm blind to the snakes. On the snake side, you had king snakes, corn snakes, king snakes, ball pythons, and
boa constrictor.
Yeah. But
and then for lizards, there are I think. I'm gambling at everything on the future that the blue tongues are going to have that ability. Now that we've got 6 or 7 morphs into production, she's just done amazing work. But the difference is that in the past, I would have attempted to scale this up to some giant fucking scale. And, but now because of my relationship with Heather, she's much better at retail facing, You can't send an ogre out like me out there to sell shit retail to the public. I'm like this fucker. I need to stay behind the scenes, unseen. I can show up on these hardcore podcasts because this is my people, but I'm just not fit for fucking prime time. And so, but she is. And so we are now doing a more kind of an old school Sandfire. But then again, I recently started trying to resurrect some of Bob's White's tree frog morphs, and that gets out of hand real quick. I have already. Yeah,
that's the thing is like the difference between
1,000 eggs and 100 eggs.
Blue tongues. The scalability of blue tongues, I think, is because I did the math on them myself, and I'm like, you can't scale them up. You can never make a blue tongue like a crested gecko or a bearded dragon just because they don't have the numbers. So is that good or bad? It depends on what your goal is. If my goal,
if my
goal is to make another animal for the retail pet trade that can be in every house, then the blue tongue is a non-starter. But if it's for the model that Ron has, then it's great. And the nice thing about we're talking about the good and the bad and stuff. Nice thing about a project like what Ron has here is that because it can't get to a point where it takes over because of the fecundity, it can stay fun.
Yep.
You'll never get like, oh shit, I've got 10,000 blue tongues. It's not fun anymore. You're always, and you've got so many different morphs going that you're always going to be excited about looking and seeing what's been born and what different has come out of it. So like to be able to keep the passion, you've got a good chance with the blue tongues.
Well, that's what the ball pythons have. And there's a ball python in almost every fucking house these days. And they're extreme. They have the same thing. They're very low production rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People that are into them are really fucking hardcore into them for the most part. There's all kinds of ways you can go. And that's still an animal that's produced on a commercial scale, but it's a scale that's shared by a lot of people.
They're a lot easier to produce than blue tongues.
No, I don't think so at all. Not at least not if you follow a few. I think
I don't know very many people that have great success producing large amounts of blue tongues in slime.
I don't think anybody has yet.
Yeah. No. So space for, I always look at when I was doing my commercial stuff, it was like how much, what's the potential of this 2 square feet to produce? And so when you start putting that into the factor, when you're using larger stuff or outdoor stuff, the scalability changes. And so in order to put a blue tongue in every house, you'd have to fence off the whole state of Florida.
Yeah, but see, you're looking at, again. But my point is that with the blue tongues, it's similar to the ball pythons, where it takes a large number of people producing smaller numbers to achieve that goal. So you're spreading it around more than if, let's just say, you and I both know that there are companies that produce 250,000 fucking bearded dragons a year, and there are multiple companies like that. Right. But they control almost all. I mean, you can make crumbs. I mean, we produce about 3,000 to 5,000 bearded dragons a year, and I know that sounds like a lot, but really, in the grand scheme of things, that's fucking nothing. Like most of the big wholesalers that they buy 100 at a time. That's spread out over the course of 5 or 6 months, so they disappear into the trade. But but you're up against companies that make 100,000. 200,000 a year, and there are 3 or 4 of those companies. They basically control that entire thing. That's not really possible with ball pythons, even though there are large companies that produce 20,000 ball pythons a year, but there's plenty of room for all the little guys. The blue tongues.
So you like the decentralized factor of it.
Yeah, for sure. It's basically kind of like fucking crypto, man.
I was going to say kind of like the Bitcoin of reptiles.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the ball python is. It's essentially herp crypto.
Yeah.
God, you shouldn't put those 2 words together because crypto is a whole other thing. But
what's the word that comes after crypto?
Sporidium. I'm gambling on that. I think that I just don't think that there's no other lizard that you can use to make the kind of radical morphs that you can get out of a blue tongue. Like crested geckos can make some cool morphs, but go look at them. They're not really radical. The lily white's probably the most radical one they have, but the base color of a crested gecko is just a kind of a brown lizard, whereas the blue tongue has oranges and reds and yellows and black and all these different colors. So there's a lot more that can be milked out of that. Whereas leopard geckos, and then plus there's the size factor and the fact that they're shiny. They display the mutations really well, and they're really bright. So,
a lot of people have tried to, set up blue tongues.
Yeah.
And like the animals that you have been passed around by people who have failed with them.
Yeah.
And I think if anybody can make it work, it's not you.
I do think that's a really, important factor anytime you're starting a thing is, like you said, what's the goal and is it feasible? How much space or how many animals am I going to get out of this and how much am I putting into it or how many, and I think that's when you're, that goes into what kind of model you're setting up and where you're setting up like a not a wholesale business, but more of a consumer based business, you can ask a lot more per animal. And then those people will benefit from spending a lot because they can turn around and breed them as well. But they're not going to get to the point where they outcompete you because, you're always going to be a step ahead of them or, have those adult animals or whatever.
Yeah, you don't need to wholesale that kind of stuff that has that. No. I mean, my most recent past, after I walked away from everything and the crescent geckos and everything, was a Gurnia. Mm-hmm. And I started with an Agurnia where it's super rare and hard to find and similar to the blue tongues on the productivity level. And I went from, I'm going to get back into reptiles. The Gurnias kind of do it for me. I'm just going to get a couple pair of this and a couple pair of that. And
he had a garage.
Next thing I knew I had a couple of hundred Gurnias. But I think that what Ron's trying to do with the blue tongues is probably a mirror of what I was doing with the Agurnia. And the only reason I stopped with the Agurnia was I developed like this histamine reaction in my room, and I wasn't even feeding feeding insects. I was feeding my foods and greens, and I would feed the depressa and the little ones crickets and mealworms because they don't do well without it. But every time I would go in there, I would like grab an Agurnia and pick it up and handle it, and then I'd walk out of the room and my arms would start itching and I'd get a rash and I would have an asthma attack. I'd have to use my inhaler. And I mean, after 40 years of herping, I had asthma problems as a kid and everything, but I'd never really had anything reptile related. And all of a sudden it just started kicking my ass and I couldn't even go in there and take care of stuff. And my daughter was like 5 and I had her taking care of the reptiles. And
I get the rashes from handling stuff now. But I think the only reason I don't get the asthma reaction is because it's almost all outdoors, and even our indoor buildings have giant bay doors.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I have to go get my inhaler and take a couple of Benadryl, and it's just like I was just like, man, like this sucks. And so now I'm back to just a couple of tortoises and a couple of geckos and a bird.
Yeah, that's something you can't call from the get-go either. I mean, if you get pretty heavy into a big project and all of a sudden you find yourself with an allergy, what do you do?
I mean, super worms would do that. Like at Sandfire, we raised our own super worms on our own crickets, and we had like a 1,000 square foot building of just insects. And that's another thing too. Like scalability is the number one point where people fail. Like I realized at Sandfire that when we started scaling stuff up, that the most important part of our whole facility was our insect room.
Mm-hmm.
Because
without the food,
without the food, because we were feeding, we were doing the White's tree frogs, right? We were producing. We had 50 to 100,000 froglets at a time. So you're talking about you're feeding 500,000 little crickets a day.
Yep.
When you run out of crickets, guess how much 500,000 crickets costs every day? $50,000 or whatever. It's like, so that was the most sacred part of our business. The most responsible person at our place was in charge of the insects. And then we had the cricket virus came. I can't remember what year that was, but wiped out the crickets and then start growing other crickets and relying more on mealworms and superworms and stuff. But man, you realize that, man, like raising reptiles isn't really about raising reptiles. It's about at least insectivorous reptiles. Yeah, and I'm sure like with snakes, it's like, well, what if you run out of mice or rats? It's not something to overlook. And then you're like, okay, well, if I'm going to prepare for the apocalypse and I need a 6-month supply of frozen rats and frozen mice, how big of a freezer do I need if I have 1,000 if I have 1,000 snakes, and so
how do you keep them from going bad? Or
and so then people skimp on that part, and they just feel like, oh, my supplier he'll have them every week when I call. And what if he doesn't? Then you've got a bunch of hungry snakes you can't feed, and then when animals go off feed and get sick, sometimes they don't come back. Sometimes pathogens that they have that are asymptomatic that they're carriers for, as soon as the animals become weak, that stuff starts to take over, and next thing you know, you've got IBD or one of these other things that shows up and just starts wiping stuff out. You don't know why, and it's maybe it's because the animals, your care for the animals dropped off, or you didn't notice that your colony was full of mites or something. It's like there's all these other outside, and that's insects again. It's like mites. I had mites in the Rhacodactylus. The Leachianus, the original wild-caught Leachianus, had these little orange mites on them. And 10, 15 years later, they were still in the captive populations here. And they weren't hard to get rid of. I finally figured out a really easy way to get rid of them. But they're like piss you off, and anything that can go from one cage to another can take a sickness from one cage to another, or even one building to another. You handle something in one room, you have a quarantine room. I mean, quarantine rooms or quarantine setups in our hobby for the most part are jokes. Oh well, I'm isolating this animal in a cage in my kitchen. I'm like, okay. Well, what do you do when you go in there and you handle that kitchen? Or show me where all your where you clean all your food bowls, or show me where show me, because cross contamination can be, you take a food bowl out, you clean it, you go put it, from one place to another, or you tinsel, or just your hands, or your shoes. If you're getting it on your feet, you walk around. I mean, when Justin, you live in this environment, and then I owned a tissue culture lab doing plant tissue cultures, and you realize really quick that
how dirty we are.
Man, it's like, how did this get here? And like, well, it came on you, fucker.
Oh yeah, and you look at like the lab supply, the mouse, breeders and things, and that is like a very clean facility. You'd think a rodent supply place like that, they're as clean as it gets. But
most people in the hobby just don't have a concept of what it takes to actually quarantine stuff. When you're dealing with, that's always the struggle of trying to be groundbreaking. Is you're always working with the shitty imported stuff. And then you get to a point where you clean the stuff up and you get it going, and you're like, shit, I need some more blood, And then it's like, okay,
produce
I don't want to do this, or even if it's captive bred from somebody else, you don't know shit about. I mean, people, but you just don't know what could be in their collection or what, and so it's like, it's such a risk. I always tried with the projects that I did. I tried to get enough animals. Which for me was about 50 was my goal, was to get enough animals the very first time, so I could do it all once and be fucking done, and close the doors and say, I don't need your animals. Not enough. I've established a clean population. It's a closed door. And then somebody's like, hey, I hatched an albino. You're like, oh man. I guess I should make an exception, or whatever. There you go, Jen. It's so hard, man.
I'm curious, Ron, like outdoors, if you deal with, because obviously it's a little more easy to control indoors with, different pathogens or some bug that's been sprayed jumping into the enclosure and maybe being toxic or something. How do you deal with that outdoors?
Well, that would be a good debate, indoors versus outdoors.
I have never ever had an issue like that outdoors. And I think that part of that is that when you're outdoors, you're protected by the sun and the elements. Those pathogens don't survive that long outside in high heat environments. Actually, indoors, if you think about it, we create these fucking perfect environments for a lot of these pathogens.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's what we do. Right. We had moderate temperatures. It's dry. There's all these things that go into place that allows us pathogens to survive longer. Outside, though, I think it's fucking annihilated pretty quickly by the sun, by the elements, and all that. Well, so I think that's part of it is Save My Ass. But there's a paper coming out apparently, and I don't know how much I'm allowed to speak about this, so I'm just going to bring this up briefly. But I think somebody told me at Daytona that's out, but they kind of showed that if you raise the body temperature, this we've known though the whole fucking time, right? Yeah. We've always known that if your shit gets sick, you raise the temperature and it generally gets better. Well, chytrid fungus couldn't survive at a certain temperature, and so you try to cook it out. Yeah. So there's a paper coming out, I guess, that shows that in a certain snake species with a certain disease, that once they got the body temperature of the snake up to a certain level, that it became disease free after a couple of weeks. Well, if you think about that. Snakes they're cold-blooded, all ectotherms are. They're relying on the environment to allow them to have a fever to deal with the fucking, so they would naturally, when they're sick in the wild, they would go spend more time basking or in a more.
That also could be a twofold situation where it's not just them being able to get hot, but it could be
that it's actually killing the pathogen.
But it could be the magic of the UV, the magic of the sun. I really believe that the natural
for sure
light has so much to contribute.
But in this instance, though, with these snakes, they did it in just an incubator. So they weren't in the sun. Okay. They weren't outside. They just proved it. You got them up to I think it's 97 degrees. And so as soon as like I said, people were talking about it openly at Daytona. So I'm pretty sure that it's out, but it was kind of one of those things where somebody gave me a heads up about it. So,
yeah. We actually discussed that I was on Trap Talk Network podcast.
Oh, so you know about this?
So we talked about that, and I thought it was really interesting. It makes sense. It was like a week at 95 in an incubator or something.
Yeah, and it was wow. I think it was nidovirus in a python species.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, but again,
I've always thought, and Ron and I have had conversations about this a little bit, but I mean, to me, the number one thing that we fight in herpetoculture that is probably causal to so many other things is hydration.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see in the winter, if you're living in a cold place like I do, and you got forced air or whatever, everything dries out and you're more susceptible to pathogens. Whereas if you've got an intact, barrier and you're well hydrated, that happens less often.
Yeah. And then just, liver function, kidney function. I mean, bearded dragons, I could I could build a bearded dragon terrarium and I could sell it as a beef jerky machine if I wanted to.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, it's really, you're creating an environment that is unnatural, and it's so hard to hydrate anything, and just drinking isn't going to solve it,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we routinely hear that you cannot breed bearded dragons outdoors in Florida because the humidity is too high. I'm like, bitch, I've been doing it since 1988 out here. Heather's been now doing it with me. She adopted my systems when we got together because she was doing them indoors. Because again, that's the thing, right? Oh, you can't have them outside. And I was like, no, that's bullshit. And this is the system. So, and then once she got used to it, she was like, oh my God, this is so awesome because I can actually go in these enclosures with them. But when it's fucking raining, like it's been raining here for 4 days, they're out drinking. And I'm sure they take in water vapor, and that helps to hydrate them just like chameleons.
And when it's not raining, they're getting dew.
Dew, yep. And when we go through dry spells, they actually start to physically dehydrate. So I have a drip system that runs across all her things that's hooked to a hose, and we turn it on. It drips water in a certain part. And dude, when you turn that on and it's been dry for a couple weeks, 100% of those fucking dragons are out there fucking drinking and doing that. So, and the air, and I live sandwiched between 2 lakes in Central Florida. My air humidity here is fucking 80%.
Yeah, the answer in a bearded dragon cage is to give them a water bowl, and what do? The first thing they do is they go over and they shit in it.
Yeah,
and then if they've got a direct life cycle parasites, then they just fucking just gets worse and worse and worse, and don't shit where you eat.
It is awful hard to replicate nature in a box, and that's kind of the challenge, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the bigger you go, maybe the more opportunities you have to have a better environment, less easily spread pathogens or more airflow or whatever, however you want to see it, or, you can open up a sunroof or something, give them access to the UV and things like that. But it's
animals that live outdoor live in a balanced environment. The way I look at herpetoculture, it's like, and then the same thing with breeding. It's like, not how do I breed these species? It's what am I doing that prevents them from breeding? Because they're born to fuck. That's the bottom line.
Primary objective.
Animals, they
pass on their genetics.
They eat, they shit, and they fuck, and that's all. That's the only thing that's important to them in the world. And so it's like, if they're not doing that, then we're preventing them from doing it. So what are we doing that keeps them from doing that? What are we not giving them? And then as a commercial breeder, you develop this mentality of, okay, I'm going to figure out what they need, what I need to give them to make them reproduce. And then when I get there, how much of it can I take away and how small can I make that box before it stops again? And it's just, that's the mentality that I had for a lot of years. And now I look at like, how can I set something up in a more naturalistic setup and make it productive but more natural. And then I think Ron is onto it with having success outdoors, because he's doing those things instead of just saying, okay, here's the bare minimum that they need, and then here's how many of them I can fit in this room. It's like, if you've got enough outside, you're not trying to produce stuff on a commercial scale, then you can have good success giving the animals more and getting rewarded more by having them just being more mentally rewarded by being able to enjoy your animals more, because there's no enjoyment sitting in front of your sweater box and watching your snakes sit under a hide rock, right? It's enjoyable to go outside or to go in, like my old frill dragon setups, to sit in front of it and watch them do stuff. Right? And that was always my problem with snakes, is snakes don't really do stuff that much, no matter what you do for them.
Oh, dude, they do if you set them up.
But for example, chondros and emerald chipos, when they're in a nice environment, are beautiful. I could sit down and stare at a chondro even if he didn't move, if he was in a nice, beautiful setup, and that would be rewarding for me. So if I was drawn to snakes, it would be those kind of snakes. But cryptic stuff that lives in a hole in the ground is just it's not my thing.
I mean, you pretty much, I think it's a perception problem with the industry right now. I think we're still locked in that 90s, it's all about bare minimums and
giant racks.
And then we have all these cage companies. They all essentially make the same fucking box. I mean, there's some that are starting to branch out and do different things, but there's not enough of them yet. And I think that's what it's really going to take. I think there's a lot of room for innovation.
Yeah, well, and with snakes too. I mean, I don't know snakes, but I would imagine that you probably like, okay, how much do I really need to feed them? Do I need to feed them twice a week? Do I need to feed them once a week? Do I need to feed them every 2 weeks? Like, at what point do they not produce as well for me, or do they not grow as fast? Or you pump them up as juveniles, and then pumping stuff up just because something grows fast. Like, I always used to get into these arguments with people with crested geckos with like, I made my foods not as sweet as other options, or people feeding baby food. There's, they grow super fast on baby food and they eat it all day. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean,
they're drug addicts with sugar.
Just because they're bigger doesn't mean they're healthier. I mean, if they don't have good bone density, if they don't have good mineral reserves, if they don't have all this stuff, they're going to, as soon as they start being reproductive, they're going to crash because they don't have the infrastructure to be reproductive and recover from it. It takes a lot to shell an egg, Mm-hmm. And when we pump stuff up and I've got mine to breed in 6 months, or I got mine, it's like, yeah, no, that's not. I always raise stuff together and let them breed when they were ready.
They're ready.
But I didn't try to raise them fast. I always just fed them a decent amount and let them go. And people are, it's not about their age. It's about their physiology. It's about the what they're made out of. And if you raise them slower, an animal that gets to a certain size and it can breed, an animal that's made out of Jello can breed, but it's not going to succeed if it wasn't raised on the proper nutrition. So, yeah. And the snake world, I don't know enough about if you feed. I know pigs have different nutrition than hoppers and adult mice, at what point you turn a butter. If you're feeding a lot of little butter balls, it's different than feeding a nice lean mouse. And then if you take a field mouse that you pull out of a wheat field and then take a lab mouse and compare their protein and fat and carbohydrates and just do a nutritional analysis, and you've probably got two different animals,
no, for sure.
Yeah.
And the one that's living in the field is the one that the snakes have evolved to grow on. And if you're feeding a mouse that's grown in a lab that has, twice or maybe three times the fatty acid composition that a field mouse does, then you're doing something that's not normal for the snake. So yeah, and then people don't really supplement when they feed their snakes. I'd talked to some people in the past about doing stuff like that, but I don't know if anybody does that. And I had some lengthy conversations with Rico, knock on wood,
Rico Welder.
Yeah, about he was really interested in supplementing and having something that we could basically gut load a mouse, like an injection that you could put into a mouse that would supplement the mouse when it was being fed and stuff. And we talked about it for a while, and then he got sick and all that happened, and that was kind of the last I heard of anybody asking about supplementing when it came to feeding snakes and stuff. But that's your realm. That's your realm, Justin. So, go ahead.
I mean, I guess, in some ways, that whole prey item in a lot, especially for a nocturnal python or whatever, kind of meets most of their needs. Now, I know, we can kind of kill them with kindness and feed too much. I remember, Matt Somerville had like this species of brown snake, in Australia. And I think he fed it maybe 2 mice a year. And one of them died, and it was just full of fat bodies. It's like, how do you get that much? I mean, it's so efficient that. I
mean, obviously, if supplementation was really needed for snake keepers, that it would have reared its head, and people would have fixed the problem. So if there's not a problem, then that you don't fix it if it works.
Now there's a lot of snake. Maybe diurnal snakes would be different, or things like that. There's a lot of different factors and considerations. But I think at least for the commonly bred species, I don't know that that's much of an issue as much as over supplementation or things like that.
What about hydration with snakes?
Yeah, I mean, usually if they have a water bowl, they're usually pretty good. Yeah, I mean, depending on the species, obviously there's, the blood pythons need to be in basically, kind of a wet environment, whereas, you do that with a woma or a desert python, you're going to run into trouble. And
what about tropical stuff like emeralds and?
Oh, I built a whole range system.
Yeah, that's Ron's realm there. Yeah.
Just like you, I ripped the Band-Aid off last year and bought 56 of them fucking things at one time and set them up. And it's been a mixed bag. All the issues that everyone else has encountered. It did real good for 8 months. Then I started having issues. Then I rectified them. Then they started again. And I've been back and forth. But I got to tell you, man, I do not believe that so think about this, right? For 50 years or more, Northern Emeralds have been coming in large numbers. And yet there is no entity, not a single one, that regularly produces captive bred emeralds. As a matter of fact, they're random one-offs here and there, usually a half-ass clutch of a few slugs and some babies. A lot of times it's just an imported female that was gravid that had the babies. There's all those things. But why, after 50 years, why isn't there not one person that's routinely producing captive bred Northern Emeralds? And there's not. And people, they think it's a disease, it's this, that, and the other thing.
So Ron said, I'm going to be that guy.
Of course. And so I started fucking with it, and I ran into the same problems. But where I'm currently at is I think that animals so I went on a Trap Talk podcast, and I talked about the regurgitation issues I was having. And then over the next week or two, I got flooded with messages from notable serious breeders that had same problems. And every single one of them, it was a grouping of snakes from a very specific region. It basically was, it was some guys with the giant rat snakes from Suriname and Guyana, some red-tailed boas from there, emeralds, all snakes that probably feed on the spiny rat.
Okay.
And the spiny rat is a fruit-eating rat. Now, we know the emeralds absolutely feed primarily on that rodent, and it eats just fruit and seeds.
So now you're feeding fruit to your emeralds?
No,
indirectly.
I would totally do that.
Yeah.
I think a video of an emerald eating a guava.
What I think is that the rodent food that we feed the rodents, when you feed them to the snake, causes gut inflammation, and over time, you're damaging the gut, and eventually that reaches a point where they probably have so much damage they can no longer hold down their meals and they start puking up. Now, I found that if you take them off food for 2 to 3 months and then offer them a meal, they'll hold it down. But if you try to chase that down with another meal a couple weeks later, long after it's digested, they'll fucking puke. You have to wait a long time in between feedings. Now, I've heard floated the idea that, well, maybe they only eat once every 3 or 4 months. Maybe that's all they can catch their prey. And that's possible. But the fact that I see these motherfuckers, they're all of those are outside in big enclosures with real trees and all that shit. Within a week after they've digested their meal, they're hunting. They hunt in a very specific way. They hang straight down at the bottom of the enclosure, waiting for the rat to walk underneath and get it. If they're doing that out there, then they're absolutely fucking doing that in the wild. And there's no way that they're going 3 months in between meals where a rodent, and supposedly the rodents are incredibly abundant there. The spiny rat is not, it's like it's very common. So I find it hard to believe that that's the thing. I think it's the fucking rodent food. It was an idea that Heather had floated initially because there's a lot of antibiotics and shit in that crap.
Well, that kind of goes back to what I was just saying about the difference between a field mouse and a lab mouse. Yeah. So
it may very well be because there's problems with all those snakes, right? There are some people that successfully produce red-tailed boas, but it's pretty rare, right? There's not like a lot of people producing them. And I've got people that are telling me they've had this issue with captive bred red tails that had no nothing to do with the wild at all. Right. So what the fuck is going on there? Why is it only this certain group of snakes from this very specific region in South America? So I think I could be totally wrong, but what I think is that something in our commercial rodents damages their gut. They have, whether it's the gut biome, the gut flora they have, maybe we're killing it off with that. Maybe there's something in the rodents that kills it. I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. All I know is if you try to do them on any kind of normal schedule, the wild caught ones, after if you just wait a few months, then they can eat a fucking giant meal and they hold it down. But man, if you try to chase that down with even something as small as a mouse, and I did try this, 100% of them puked it back up. So they held down a full-grown large rat and completely digested it within 4 days and defecated and everything they're supposed to do. Like, I don't have any of these constipation problems or anything because mine are outside in high humidity and high heat, and they have an overhead rain system.
Doesn't matter if it's a rat or a mouse?
No, it does not fucking matter.
What about chicks? Have you ever fed chicks?
I have not.
What about guinea pigs? Like,
I tried quail, but the fuckers didn't eat them. That I had Jason Hood bring me a whole bunch of quail.
You're not feeding anything live, right? You're feeding everything frozen.
No, I'm doing live and frozen.
Oh, you are?
Whatever I can get. But I had Jason Hood bring me a bunch of live quail. I put them in there. They gave zero fucks. I had a bunch of snakes living with quail, and I ended up giving the quail to my mom.
No, I mean the rats and the mice. Are you doing live?
Yeah, live and frozen, whatever, whatever I can get, and the result is always the same. As long as I feed them sparingly, I can feed them whatever the fuck I want, and they hold it down. But if I try to do it on any kind of schedule, even as close as 3 weeks apart, 4 weeks apart, a percentage of them puke. Not all of them all the time, but most of them will. And then, there's this thing where I know for a fact that there are some people that have these that have small numbers of them that have never regurgitated. So are those outliers? Are those,
they were wild caught or they were,
they're wild caught. So, but my question is, are those like random outliers, right? Like not everybody has IBS or not everybody, you know what I'm saying? Like I know guys that can't eat a fucking slice of pizza or it'll put them in the hospital. Is that the kind of thing that's going on? Or I'm at a loss with it. Honestly, I've gotten to the point where I'm just like, I have them all set up in these underneath all the trees out there and they're doing well, as far as that. But the fact that they fucking puke like this when I try to put them on any kind of a schedule at all, is beating me to the fucking dirt. The interesting thing, though, and this is where it comes back to, for the initial 8 months after I brought them in, right? So from the day they came in, and I got them all within the span of a week because just like you said, I knew going into this, it was risky. So I wanted to rip the fucking Band-Aid off right there. And I wanted to have enough that I would not have to ever do this again. So I did it one fucking time and that was it. That 8 months, 100% of them were eating every 2 weeks and holding down every meal. And I did not have a single regurgitation. And so 8 months in, it's
obviously whatever happened is your fault then.
I know it absolutely is. So 8 months in, it started, and then I've had people now that have attempted this on some kind of scale with emeralds tell me that they had similar issues up to about 2 years. Like they got through a year or two where everything was great, and then they said if you can get past 2 years without it, but I have not found anybody that's gotten past 2 years yet.
It seems like it would be a pretty simple. I mean, obviously you'd have to sacrifice the animals, but have a pathologist look at the, intestinal tract and see if there's. So there actually
have been that done, and they found lesions in the gut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they also found
with the diet is negative.
But they also found traces of chlamydia, bird chlamydia, and crypto, and a couple other things, but.
Usually pathogens like that are opportunistic. So if there's damage to the intestinal system, then that gives them a foothold.
Right.
Whereas normally they would just, be
there and
minor populations or benign.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I think has happened. I think when they find those things, they're just seeing the result of the stressor on the snake over the period of time where, maybe they got a little more of a foothold, but in every instance, there's none of the papers that have been done that I've read said that it was the regurgitation syndrome was caused by one of those pathogens. It said we found them there, but we cannot definitively say that it was the cause, but the gut linings had lesions. Well, if there's some shit in the fucking food, I mean, that does explain why it has, because look, if you had
like lesions, like as in like what I would think of as an ulcer or something.
That's what I took from it, what I read, but I'm not, this is above my pay grade.
Yeah.
So
Pathology is a different language altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not that there's no financial incentive here. If you could produce captive born Northern Emeralds, you could sell them all fucking day long for $1,500 easy, $1,000 minimum. Like you would sell if you showed up at a show with with tables full of them, you would fucking sell them.
Especially if you could figure out what's causing the damage. That sounds like an Allen problem. He can start breeding spiny rats or something, feeding them.
Right. Yeah. So I have a solution for it.
Sausages.
I have a solution for it, and that is I tried raising the commercial rats on a fruit and seed diet. Doesn't work. They're just not. They just can't do it. Right. They just get skinny and they fucking go to hell. But African soft furs, though, live very well on a diet of bird seed and fruit.
Yeah.
So I'm probably, after I get all this skink shit, because she's got all these babies and I'm in the middle of building up her systems for that. But after that's done, then I'm going to put together some kind of a small thing that I can breed my own soft furs, and then just try feeding them just that and see if that changes the equation. Yeah.
What about like a gutted? I mean, if it doesn't have the intestinal tract, it's just the muscle and the skin and the fur and stuff, does it have?
So I tried that.
Same effect.
I did. I emptied them out and they didn't regurgitate them. But when I tried it 4 weeks later, then they puked.
Okay.
So, but if you think about it, if the rat has been raised on this diet its whole life and the diet is the problem, then every inch of that rat is completely formulated with that stuff, right? Because
that's where I'm getting hung up. Because they're converting it to protein. So protein, I'm trying to think how
wouldn't they the same amino acids antibiotics still be? And the chemicals would not be part of their makeup, just like we have fucking microplastics and all
potentially. Yeah. Like that's what I'm trying to, work out, how that's getting incorporated, or if it's just, that's why I said, if you remove the intestinal tract, does it change it? But
however, there also could be the fact that I didn't wait long enough from the previous damage. So every time you feed them, you're still causing damage.
Yeah.
Because you're activating all their, snakes go through that. Eating for a snake is incredibly stressful. Their body physiology changes while they do it. Their heart rate goes up. There's all this shit that happens to them, apparently. So
organs change, sizes, and all sorts of things.
Yeah. So it's not like a lizard that eats all the fucking time. That kind of snakes are made to eat sparingly. And I don't know. I thought it was, I just don't know. I'm at a loss, but at this point I kind of hit the fuck it thing. And it's just whatever happens. They're out there. I stay on top of them. I'm only feeding them every couple months until I get my own rodent colony going, and then we'll see. But to say I'm aggravated by this is an understatement.
Are there any native feral like mice or rats that you could just trap? Where do you live?
I live behind Orlando International Airport, and my neighbor. So it's funny. My one next door neighbor is one of the.
Yeah, I guess then you got the risk of getting something that somebody pours into, though.
My neighbor on one side
of the country.
Yeah, we're on 5 acre tracts here, but the neighbor on the other side of me basically lives on kind of a totally manicured golf course. This guy sprays Roundup around the perimeter like every couple of weeks, and So I'm sure that he's got, I'd be afraid of pulling in
bait,
any rodents that might, So, because that place is so manicured and it's so pristine that I imagine they have, all kinds of pesticides. And
what about blue tongues?
What about them?
Maybe they would.
No, I'm not feeding them. you would.
I was thinking iguanas. There's a lot of iguanas down there. Maybe
you would find me crucified in the front yard. Heather would be holding the nails and the hammer.
I imagine they're probably adapted to more of a mammalian diet anyway. The boas.
Yeah, I mean the emerald tree boa specifically, we know from field studies that it eats rats. It was never a bird eater. The way it hunts, it's very clear. It hunts at night. Where the fuck are they going to find birds at night on the ground?
Or lizards.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so they're going down to the forest floor and sitting above the leaf litter and waiting for something to run by.
Yeah, and chondros do the same thing.
Yeah.
So
the field studies on chondros, I found some papers on some of the prey items that they have, and they don't. I mean, you're probably have a better chance of finding a chondro in Iron Range anyway than you are finding their prey species. I think they're just very low density prey, and so the chondros are going down every day trying to hunt, but they're very rarely successful, it seems, from the published literature. But
and that may be the thing with emeralds too. Maybe it is
seasonally at least
2 or 3 times a year. Maybe that's it.
Just because they're going down to hunt doesn't mean that something comes along that night. They might sit there for 2 weeks.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, right? I would think though, after 2 or 3 weeks go by, they would find something, but maybe not. Maybe they're only getting 2 or 3 meals a year. Maybe that's the whole key to all of that shit from that.
And maybe working that out, how many meals it actually takes to be successful. Kind of that Allen Repashy math. How many rodents do I have to feed this thing to get a decent sized litter or whatever?
Shit, man, I would be fucking ecstatic if I only have to feed one rat a year and get 12 fucking babies worth $1,000 a piece or whatever the hell they would go for.
That's good math.
Did they make, in the chondro paper, did they make any hypothesis on how often they were actually eating?
I mean, not like a number of rodents per year or whatever. But I mean, just the fact that they weren't very successful or didn't eat very frequently, but also that they don't reproduce every year. So, trying to do a commercial, you got to find that balance between how much is too much and things like that, and how much is too little. And
I have some chondros, and I've noticed that they're way more. They're way faster, way more aggressive about feeding. Mm-hmm. Like
they got to catch it when they can, because it's not coming along every often. Maybe emeralds are just dopier. They're not as good as hunters.
Emeralds don't move. They just sit straight down and that's it. And if it doesn't pass directly under them, but chondros will actively hunt shit.
Yeah.
So because I put live rats in with the chondros, I have a few that will only eat live. Yeah. And holy fuck, dude. I mean, these are big enclosures, right? These are not little boxes. They're 4x4x2. The chondros are usually up on the top level, and it's full of fucking branches and trees. Man, when that rodent hits the floor of that cage, doesn't matter day or night, those fucking chondros, it's like a fucking spring. They just spring out of their coil, race down to the bottom, grab the fucking rat. The emeralds don't fucking do that at all. They're just,
So maybe the food is more abundant for the emeralds, but they're just not as skilled hunters. So maybe they're not eating that.
Unless it comes up and sniffs their nose, they don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, are you seeing them being emaciated? Like, are they losing a lot of weight? I mean, with eating over, every month or so? So
when they were eating once a month, then no, they were doing they were actually gaining weight. Now the last round that I took off a couple months after they had regurged, some of them are starting to, you can start seeing that they're losing a little bit of their body fat. So they're due for a feeding in about 2.5, 3 more weeks. It'll have been 2 months since the last time. So then, but prior to this, I was giving them a lot of small meals because I thought that was the problem. Then I tested out with some large rats and noticed, oh fuck, they hold these down just fine. So that makes a huge difference. Like the ones that I fed the large rats to have very good body weight.
Yeah.
So
I remember seeing a picture that I think Jeff Lem put up of an emerald in the wild that had an absolutely massive like food bolus, like it had eaten the biggest thing it could find, and this was a good sized emerald. So yeah, maybe they're just eating larger meals less frequently,
almost never. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
So
that's definitely a challenge of establishing
everyone told me not to fucking do this. Everybody was like, "You're fucking crazy." And then I thought, well, I was like, I won't have to throw in anybody's money, like none of my investor money, none of my own money, technically, because what I did was I took the anole thing that I was just like he said. I reached a point with that anole thing where I had 2,500 square feet of these fucking anoles. And I'm like, this shit is not fun now. This is, I'm not enjoying this. It's not fun trying to keep track. I was trying to produce like 6 different morphs of the giant anoles and tracking all those hets and everything. So I was like, fuck this. This is miserable. So I sold the whole thing to one guy, and then I took all that money and we put it into those emeralds. So it was just kind of like I rolled one project and turned it into something, that I actually wanted to do, because I've always wanted to work on emeralds, but I just, for all the reasons that I just listed, I've always avoided it because you hear nothing but horror stories, and there are very few success stories.
Yeah.
And when they are, they're generally not consistent. Like people get lucky here and there, or they get random one-offs. There's a variety of things, but in 40 years, there's not a single motherfucker that is producing. And and one of the things that I thought was interesting was he was talking about Rico Walder, who was probably the most successful of all these people that's ever lived currently.
Yeah.
The fact that Rico was talking to him about that, about, gut loading the rats. So he may have been looking at this as well. Mm-hmm. So
was that Justin? Was that the trip? Were you on that trip?
Yeah.
That's right. That's when that
2010 trip.
That's when that conversation started.
Yeah.
I would have liked to. It's too bad he's not.
Yeah. That's a big loss for sure.
What year did we lose him?
2014.
Yeah, it was only a few years after that trip. Yeah.
Super nice guy. Like, to me, like sitting here watching you guys talk about these emeralds, I'm like trying to stay awake. but Rico made the snake stuff interesting to me, obviously, because like my passion for the nutrition stuff. I was like, wow, that'd be like neat to I didn't. It was the first time that anyone had said to me that they thought that snakes needed something more nutritionally, and
well, he had everybody tricked that he was a snake guy. He was a turtle guy, right?
Yeah. Right,
you remember him at the pig-nosed turtle? He was checking out.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, we could probably go on all night. I'm sure you guys could talk till the break of dawn, but I'm unfortunately I got to run, so maybe we do a round 2 of this. But thanks so much for coming on. This has been a pleasure for me, for sure. I mean, you guys I've looked up to both of you for a very long time, and I'm glad that it's been just awesome having you guys on. So thank you, and hopefully you can come back soon, and we can branch out on this discussion a little more.
In all seriousness, Ron is my oldest memory and my oldest friend, I'd say, in reptiles is Ron. And nice. We lost touch a few times for quite a few years, and we always kind of found our way back to each other. And we went and on a lot of we had a lot of good talks about different stuff and not just reptiles and stuff, but
for sure.
It's glad to see him doing so well now, and wish him a lot of luck with the new projects for sure.
Yeah, I definitely want to see some success there too. I'm excited for all these cool projects you got going. So
I appreciate that, guys. But this fucker is out from under his rock now, willing to do podcasts. So any other podcasters listening to him, he's available finally after forever.
I did decide that I need to start talking a little more. I think losing Bob recently kind of shook me up quite a bit, and I'm just like, there's a lot of stories to be told. And
that'd be a good candidate for herp history. I know Eric and Rob do a herp history.
That's a good one.
Be really cool to have it down in recorded format. So
yeah, and I almost had Philippe joining us tonight as a surprise. I said, "Hey, Philippe, you're doing this thing. You should like slip in on it." And he's like, "Oh, I can't." But
that would have been good.
Yeah,
Philippe came over Sunday. Philippe and I had he came over and we had a couple beers, and I cooked him some bratwurst on the barbecue, and we caught.
See, I wish I lived out there because
I can't. I mean, a lot of my success in the hobby is from hard work, but a lot of it is just from being in the right place with the right people. I mean, it's like having Philippe and Bob, literally as neighbors. I mean, how the fuck could you not just become something better than you were just through osmosis? I mean, just being around those guys is an honor and a privilege, and it's interesting. And Philippe is he's done so much more than most people know. I mean, our hobby is just our hobby would not be anything that it is now without what he did in the past that nobody under 40 even probably knows much about. So he's
really responsible for all of us.
Yeah. Right. He's the godfather of
and to call him one of my best friends is just
that's cool.
I constantly just like how lucky am I,
Yeah.
And then I get fuckers like this guy that come into my life, and it's everything I can do to tolerate him. But there's a few good nuggets here and there. And, if he hadn't have picked me out some good frilled dragons, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. Well, thanks, guys. I don't know that you need to throw out your information. I think pretty much everybody knows who you are.
Yeah, we're good.
Where to find you, but
he might. I mean, nobody knows who this.
If you're looking for Ron, just start looking under rocks.
No, that's you.
You're out from under the rock now. So
that is definitely you. You can find me on a shit ton of podcasts. I have never turned these down for 10 years.
Well, I'm looking forward to Herpaton 3. Maybe we can get Ron out to the West Coast again.
If you guys do that, I'll be there.
Yeah,
be really cool.
Both of you guys have got some things to say and some things to share, and I'd like to do it in more of a
relaxed
environment. I mean, my picture of Herpaton is like it's not going to be. You don't pay anything to go. You just show up, and there's no. I mean, maybe we'll kind of schedule talks, or we'll bring in people that we know have stuff to share, but it'll be informal and there's no hotels that are close or anything. So you got to come prepared with a tent, or you can stay inside the shop, and we'll be roughing it a little bit, but that's half the fun. And the herping should be unreal, if we do it the right time. So
I think Justin has to go, and you won't shut the fuck up.
Yeah, we'll just say, okay, there's going to be a separate fire pit over here, and then Justin's going to stand on that rock, and he'll just be talking all night. So just head over there, and when you get enough, come back over here.
Oh boy,
we could set it up like speed dating,
Yeah. Just make. I think that's
somewhere, and then every 10 minutes you move. That'd be kind of fun.
Everybody gets kind of into their own little, world and within, their sub world. And then it really helps to mix and, get ideas from different groups like tortoise groups or lizard. Even snake groups have something to offer. Alan.
That was Philippe and I's one of our most important things about Herpaton was to get the lizard guy and the chameleon, the snake guy and the tortoise guy and the turtle guy and whatever, get those people all interacting, because like you said, it's like I'm a crested gecko guy, and all I do is talk to crested gecko people, and I could give a fuck about what happens with the ball python world, but
also the formal like giving talks and slideshows. it's a little less productive that way because, you need to get into the nuts and bolts and discuss, how their view can influence yours and help you and build, things. So, I think your idea of doing it kind of informally or maybe loosely, formal would be a good way to do it.
It'd be fun. I mean, it'd be different. I don't think that, we're not going to have the turnout that we would if we put it in a hotel and did the formal thing. But honestly, I don't care. I just want to be surrounded by people that I call friends and or that I want to be able to call friend and get to know people on a face-to-face level and learn about something. I mean, I'm an old fuck. Ron's an old fuck. I don't know.
He's getting there. He's going to be 50, man.
50, yeah.
Big 5-0
this March.
But I still have Australia. I still have a lot to learn, and there's a lot of people that are 25-year-olds that can teach me a lot about something that I haven't studied. So age is not. It's irrelevant when it comes to being an expert at something. Is if you focus on something for 5 years and I don't look at it at all, and I'm 60 and you're 25, it doesn't matter. I'm going to learn from you.
They're the expert.
Yeah. And I love learning. I mean, every day I go to sleep every day I make a point to, what did I learn today? I mean, it's like it could be any facet of my life, but the day you stop learning is the day you start dying.
Yep, exactly.
That's true.
Good words to end by, but hopefully we can do another round 2 and appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot.
We'll see. We might get heckled and protested, and make sure you put an adult a parental advisory before you play
NC-17.
NC-17 or R.
All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of Reptile Fight Club.
Thanks, Justin, for putting
this together. Guys. Have a good night.
See you,